Good evening to all of you. Today, on behalf of Johnson & Johnson, we would like to welcome you all on our case-based webinar on recent advances in shoulder surgery. And today we are having Dr. Rajat Jangir, who is a consultant and orthopedic and director based at Mahatma Gandhi Hospital. He is also the professor and head of Mahatma Gandhi Hospital in the Department of Sport Medicine, Jaipur. Dr. Rajat Jangir is having a vast experience, and he is also part of various organizing committee like Indian Arthroscopy Society, Indian Cartilage Society, and many more. Dr. Rajat Jangir has won various awards like Best Reviewer Award in the Journal of Orthopedic Case Report 2017, Best Publication Award for Delhi Orthopedic Association, DOACON 2017. He is also the editorial board member of Journal of Indian Arthroscopy Society and Journal of Orthopedic and Bone Disorders for Medwin Publishers. And at the same time, he has been part of various forums and various other symposiums in the last 5-6 years. Dr. Rajat Jangir has been also been part of Rio Olympic in the year 2016 as the sports medicine doctor. So today we are very much thrilled to have Dr. Rajat Jangir with us, and he is expert in this field. So without wasting much time, I will be handing over the session to the doctor, and the Q&A that we will be having, we will be taking at the end. So Dr. Rajat Jangir, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Diptam, for that kind introduction. So I'm Dr. Rajat, and basically I'm a shoulder and knee surgeon, and I will be speaking on recent advances in shoulder surgery. So this is not going to be like a theory lecture. This is going to be a practical case-based discussion, and we can take question and answers after the session. So I did my education from BJ Medical College, Ahmedabad. Then I did my shoulder arthroscopy fellowship with Professor Emilio Calvo from Spain, and also my knee arthroscopy fellowship from South Korea with Professor Juno Bong. So that was my initial teaching, and later on I decided to do my practice. And so there are so many common shoulder problems, and if I divide them, they are quite common in young patient and elderly patient. So in young patients, there are few specific problems like shoulder dislocation. So young patient, they are physically active, and they may also have a road traffic accident. So shoulder dislocation is quite common in them. There are some athletes and sports person, especially the volleyball players, those requires the overhead activity. They are very likely to get the slap tears, and those similar patients also get the impingement, and this is typically a posterior superior impingement. And another thing is the biceps tendinitis, that is inflammation around the biceps tendon. And being physically active, they are also likely to get more of fractures. So these are quite common entities around the shoulder in young patients. In elderly patient, if we compare to the young patients, the diagnoses are quite different. We see more often the rotator cuff impingement thing. First, they start with the rotator cuff dysfunction, then the impingement. Later on, it converts to a rotator cuff tear. Primary shoulder arthritis is also a common entity in elderly, and the rotator cuff tear, they might convert into a rotator cuff arthropathy in those patients. So the diagnosis quite varies in young and the elderly patient. Young, if I say the less than 35 to 40 age group, and elderly, I say 55 to 60, more than that. So we'll take one by one all of these things which are common around shoulder. In young patient, if we start, it is the shoulder dislocation, which is quite common, and it is quite recurrent because the elderly people, they may get a shoulder dislocation, but it is not recurrent in those patients. Why shoulder dislocation is quite common? Because the shoulder is the most mobile joint in the body, and this mobility comes at the cost of stability. So in any activity which have this abduction and external rotation, So in those activities, this abduction external rotation, there might be an injury and it may push the head antero-inferiorly. So this leads to a typical lesion, that is the Bankart lesion. So that Bankart lesion is the peeling off of the antero-inferior labrum due to push by the head. And also when this head strikes against the glenoid, it produces a posterior-superior bony defect. That defect is known as a Hill-Sachs lesion. So to diagnose these patients, we often need an MRI. An MRI will typically demonstrate the antero-inferior Bankart lesion and the Hill-Sachs lesion. So in these patients, what we do is the arthroscopic Bankart repair. So this is typically done in this lateral position. So this is the examination under general anesthesia, and this is done typically with 3 portals. So this is one is viewing portal, and there are 2 instrument portals. So through which we would do the surgery. What is the advantage of these 3 portals? Only that there is going to be a faster recovery because there is less of bleeding, less of soft tissue trauma, less of post-operative pain. So this leads to a faster recovery. So this is the arthroscopic view. This is on the one side. You can see here, this is the glenoid part, and here comes the labrum, but there is no labrum here. And this is the capsule. So labrum with the capsule is avulsed or separated from the glenoid. So this is arthroscopic view. This is glenoid. This is capsule and a labrum. There is almost no labrum. So with those 2 instrument portal, we are viewing from the superior portal, and with the other portals, we do this surgery that is known as the Bankart repair arthroscopic surgery. And we place, here is the cartilage and there is a bone. We place a anchor here, and with the sutures we repair this capsule and produce a bumper. So there is no antero-inferior dislocation. So this is one patient after the 3 months of the surgery. So after the surgery, he underwent the regular rehabilitation or the physiotherapy, and after 3 months, he is able to play the volleyball again. So this is another case scenario. That was the antero-inferior dislocation, and this is the posterior shoulder dislocation. So this patient is a boxer, national level boxer, and he had some trauma. He was hit from backside by someone during a fight, and he developed a posterior dislocation. But he also had this problem that he made it habitual. So this was a posterior inferior dislocation, which he incidentally later on made habitual. So he was able to dislocate this shoulder. So in this video, you can see that he is able to dislocate his shoulder posteriorly. And this was also the cause of pain around the shoulder, because he later on developed this scapular disc kinesia, because that is the muscle dysfunction around the shoulder. So this was his arthroscopic picture. So you can see the labrum, the posterior inferior labrum is torn, and there is also an separation from the cartilage. This was also repaired back with the help of those anchor sutures, similar to that has been shown in the previous video. So this is the result after 6 months. So he was able to play the boxing again, and there was no pain. So relieved from the habitual dislocations, and also relieved from the pain which he was suffering from the recurrent dislocation, that is the habitual plus the posterior inferior instability. Another very common problem in the shoulder to the overhead athletes, that is volleyball, baseball pitchers, and badminton smashers. So in these patients is a quite common scenario, that is the slap tear. So here in the middle picture, you can see the biceps tendon, the long head of biceps attaches to the superior labrum. So due to the excessive demand of external rotation, because these patients require excessive external rotation to get the force during the cocking phase. So there is compensatory reduction in the internal rotation that leads to the posterior superior impingement as well as excessive force on the labrum. So this leads to a tear here. The biceps attached to the superior labrum, there is a tear here that is known as a superior labrum anterior to posterior tear. So there is a tear in the superior labrum. In this video, you can see the arthroscopic picture. This is the labrum and this is the biceps, and you can see a superior labrum anterior to posterior type of tear. So these patients also require investigation, that is the MRI. Sometime we may not be able to diagnose it on MRI, and we may require an MR arthrography. So we can see the labrum tear, and on arthroscopic biceps stenodesis, this is the procedure which we could do in these patients, especially for athletes. If it is a non-athlete, we can do a slap repair, but for the athlete people, we always prefer a biceps stenodesis because it produces the long term and back to sports. So this is the video of the patient after 3 months. He is able to throw the ball again. So they always have a problem in throwing, and after the surgery, the 3 months of the continuous rehabilitation, he is able to throw the things again without any pain. Another very common entity is the biceps tendonitis. So here the problem is not in the intra-articular portion, it is in the groove, the biceps groove. So there is an inflammation around this tendon here, and the patient may feel pain and weakness around the shoulder, especially those overhead athletes. Diagnosis can be done with an MRI, USG. Essentially, these patients are initially managed conservatively for at least 2-3 months with all the pain modalities. Some patients may require a USG guided steroid injections. If the physical therapy is not effective, that means that it is refractory to the treatment, then we may require again the biceps tendinodesis. So here in the slap tear, here is the problem. So we do a biceps tendinodesis here, that is known as a intra-articular above this groove, the biceps tendinodesis. If there is a problem here in biceps tendonitis, we do a subpectoral below the pectoralis major muscle. So this is a subpectoral tendinodesis. This is again a very rewarding surgery. So all these surgery, minimal invasive, the arthroscopic surgery, what is the advantage? The advantage is very minimal incision, very minimal soft tissue trauma. It leads to less postoperative pain, faster healing, and low infection rate. So these are the advantages of doing an arthroscopic surgery. Another common entity in elderly people is the frozen shoulder, adhesive capsulitis. So if we see routinely in our OPD, there are so many patients and they come to us and they say we have a frozen shoulder. So in a general public, in general practitioners, there is a common diagnosis that is a frozen shoulder, but not all the patients they are having the frozen shoulder. Frozen shoulder, we can say when there is no active or passive range of motion. So that is a frozen shoulder. If there is a movement, but there is still a pain, so diagnosis can be different. It can be a rotator cuff tear, it can be something else, it can be a slap tear. There are so many things which can be there. So diagnosis has to be stamped. Frozen shoulder is usually affecting the elderly people around 45, diabetic and thyroid people, and they always have pain and stiffness around shoulder joint. Night pain is very worse. They cannot sleep on the affected side. But the good news about this frozen shoulder is that it is self-limiting. In few patients, it may last for 3 months. In some patients, maybe up to 1.5 years. But this is a self-limiting condition which lasts for 3 phases. First phase is phase of pain. second stage pain and stiffness, and third stage is the release phase. So insidiously the patient is going to get better with the therapy. Essentially the treatment is the physiotherapy. Most of these patients, I would say 98% of these patients do good with physiotherapy alone. In few patients, we may require steroid injections to relieve the pain, but it doesn't alter the natural history, because ultimately patients need physiotherapy. But few patients, only 2% of the patient, they are refractory to all this treatment, and they are painful, they are stiff, they cannot move, and they're affecting their lifestyle, and they cannot sleep. So in those patients, we may require an arthroscopic surgery. Those 2% patient, here we can see the first image. This is the normal shoulder arthroscopic. There's no inflammation, there is no redness. But in the second image, this is the image of the frozen shoulder. So we can see the capsule is thick, capsule is red, inflamed, and there is no gap. The capsule is very tight. So we need to release these capsule, the glenohumeral ligaments, with an arthroscopic surgery. So I will explain this. This is the one case example. Not able to do forward flexion, abduction up to 90 degrees, severely painful. We did an arthroscopic release, and after 6 weeks of rehabilitation, she is able to do all the range of motion normally without any pain. Elderly patients, they might be having a rotator cuff dysfunction initially when there is a problem. So there are rotator cuff muscles. Those muscles stabilizes the shoulder joint and do the movement around the shoulder joint. So anteriorly there is a subscapularis muscle, posteriorly there is infraspinatus and teres minor muscle, and superiorly there is a supraspinatus muscle. That supraspinatus muscle leads to initiation of abduction, and the deltoid muscle is the counterpart of that. And subscapularis and the infraspinatus and teres minor, these are the force couples. So they act together in tandem. They act as a force couple. So any one of them is disturbed, it leads to a rotator cuff dysfunction. So rotator cuff dysfunction leads to superior migration of head, later on impingement. That impingement can lead to a rotator cuff tear. So this rotator cuff tear leads to weakness in the shoulder. They are having pain in their shoulder. That pain is quite worse at night, and it may radiate to the arm. They have their sleepless night. So in this picture you can see the tendon of the supraspinatus. This is supraspinatus, this is subscapularis muscle. The tear is extending from supraspinatus to the subscapularis. This is one case example. So he's not able to forward flex the shoulder, and also not able to abduct the shoulder, and having a severe pain in the shoulder, and that is radiating to the arm. So this is the clinical scenario. We did the rotator cuff repair surgery. So arthroscopic, this is the arthroscopic image. Rotator cuff, this is the bone, the humerus side, and this cuff is torn from here. This is the footprint. So this was repaired with the anchor sutures here. And this is done with a few portals only. There are no scars, there is no long incisions. So this is done with these portals only. So this is the result after 3 months of rehabilitation. So the patient needs a continuous physiotherapy after surgery. So he is able to fully do all the movements, the forward flexion, the abduction, and he is pain free. So this is the result after 3 months. Another very common problem in elderly people is the shoulder arthritis. Shoulder arthritis we see very often in knee joint because we do squatting. A lot of Indian people, they do squatting, so that's why we often get knee arthritis. Hip and shoulder arthritis is quite uncommon in Indian population. Still we see patients, those are having osteoarthritis around the shoulder joint, and rheumatoid arthritis is also a common entity. There might be an arthritis that is following an injury, that is post-traumatic arthritis. But we need to differentiate between an osteoarthritis and a rotator tear arthropathy. That means that rotator cuff dysfunction is persistent and that has lead to an arthritis in the acromiohumeral part and the glenohumeral part. So that is rotator cuff arthropathy. I will describe both of them. So this is how the primary arthritis, osteoarthritis has the same process of aging that is there in the knee. But this rotator cuff arthropathy, this is a different mechanism because there are force couples inside the shoulder joint. That subscapularis muscle is coupling to the infraspinatus and teres minor, and this deltoid is coupling to the supraspinatus. So once there is a tear, there is a disturbance in this mechanism, and this leads to superior migration of the head. The head is abutting against the acromion. It leads to the acromiohumeral arthritis. Later on, it leads to the glenohumeral arthritis that starts in the superior portion. So this is due to, not due to the primary arthritis that is due to aging. This is due to the rotator cuff dysfunction or rotator cuff tears. So what is the answer to these things? So in these patients with the arthritis or the rotator cuff arthropathy, we need a shoulder replacement surgery. So this is different in rotator cuff arthropathy and different in primary arthritis. There are three types of shoulder replacement, that is the hemi-shoulder replacement, the total shoulder replacement, and the reverse shoulder replacement. So that I will take one by one. So for the primary arthritis, we need to do this conventional shoulder replacement. But if there is a rotator cuff arthropathy, then there is a deficient cuff. So all the function of the cuff has to be transferred to the deltoid muscle. So here, this is the humeral part, this is the head part, and this is the glenoid part. But in a reverse shoulder, the head is replaced with a ball here. This is the glenoid part. This is replaced with the ball, and the humeral head part, this is replaced with the socket. This is exactly the reverse of the normal. So in total shoulder, there's a replacement with the head, and here it is exactly the reverse. So this is one case example. This is a failed primary fixation of the shoulder. So here also there is no much bone left here, and this implant has failed and there was no infection. So we need to proceed with the implant that can transfer the rotator cuff functions to the deltoid muscle, because there is no tuberosities left out. So we cannot do a total shoulder here. That will be non-functional. So we did a reverse shoulder replacement. Here the socket is replaced with the head and head is replaced with the socket. So this is after the 3 months of physiotherapy after the reverse shoulder replacement surgery. So he's able to do forward flexion. This is the forward flexion. This is the abduction. So abduction is, this is bit less than the normal, but this is 120. That is quite normal. External rotation. So this is after 3 months of the surgery, reverse shoulder replacement. This is another case example. This is a 52 years old male. He has a road traffic accident. He was in ICU and he is a 2 times kidney transplant. So one time the kidney transplant has failed. Again, he received a kidney transplant. He was in ICU on ventilator due to uncontrolled renal functions. That went on for 10 days. After 10 days, we fixed the other trauma in the lower limb. We could not fix this fracture around the shoulder. This was quite complicated fracture, and this was fixed after 1 month to buy some time to get the patient better and recover from the ICU. So the humeral head appears to be shattered. In this X-ray, we could not appreciate the articular congruity. So we ordered a CT scan. This is the CT scan images, and the CT scan images shows that there is a comminution and the head is quite shattered, and there is also posterior dislocation. So this is the intraoperative images for that surgery, and here we could see that this humeral head is shattered. It is shattered into pieces. We did the hemiarthroplasty. We replaced the humeral head part only. We did not replace the glenoid part. So this is the result after 12 weeks. Able to do forward flexion, abduction, rotations. He's on continuous physiotherapy after that also. So his function are going to improve with time as well. So he's got good function after the hemi shoulder replacement. And another case example of shoulder replacement is the tumor around the shoulder joint. So this patient is having a CA esophagus. So he was operated for carcinoma of esophagus, and he got a solitary metastasis, and he's a good survival rate after that surgery, that is more than 2 years. So if this patient is not having a long-term survival, then we would not have done any surgery for this patient. But he is going to have a good survival. That's why we opted for a surgery around the shoulder, because he was having severe pain, not able to move the limb. So this patient was operated with a prosthesis around the shoulder, that is hemi shoulder replacement again. So this is an extended indication for the arthroplasty, the shoulder replacement around the shoulder joint. So these were different case scenarios with their results and different surgeries explained. From arthroscopic surgery to the open surgeries, the replacement surgeries, tumor surgeries, and also the fracture surgery. So these are so many advances in the shoulder surgeries in recent days. Previously, we used to almost hear that somebody has got knee replacement and hip replacement, but nowadays we are able to hear from someone that the shoulder replacement is also a common surgery, but it is not that much common related to knee joint, because these patients, the number of these patients are less, and another thing is the replacement is the cost constraint. This is a costly surgery. That's why we have these patients get operated less often. So I had this opportunity to being able to work with one of the best surgeons in the world. Those are almost the designer surgeon of the few surgeries. The Algedo Hangudi, who designed the Oates procedure, the meniscus repair surgeon, or the Freddy Fu, he's almost the world's best ACL surgeon. So I had the opportunity to work with them and learn from them. This is my operation theater that is equipped with all the facility required for these high-end surgeries. This is my OT that is equipped with all the infrastructure that is required to do all these surgeries. And you cannot do all the things alone. So this is my team with the physiotherapist, the nursing staff, the support staff. So all these, they continuously help me to get the best result out of them. I was fortunate enough to get this diploma sports medicine with International Olympic Committee that was done in 2015, and it was the world's first batch. And also did my advanced team physician course for the sports medicine from International Olympic Committee, that was done in 2016 at Morocco. And I had the opportunity to work with all the international athletes at Rio Olympic Games, and Deepa Karmakar, Sakshi Malik, and also I had these opportunities to do these surgeries of this national wrestler, national hockey player, national taekwondo player, and they also did well after the surgery. They had their skills, that's why they did best in there. But after the surgery, you know, to get the best result is quite difficult. But they did good after the surgery as well. He's Manish from national hockey player, and he's doing good. And here is another patient who is a national taekwondo player. He got an ACL surgery done 5 or 6 years back, and after the surgery he got this gold medal at the national games. Another patient, the posterior dislocation patient, he was back to sports. He's again a national level boxer. Another patient, he's a captain of the Air Force team. He got a revision ACL surgery done in 2016 or 17, I guess. And he's playing the best of his life after the surgery, and he scored the maximum in the last games. And he's not a national athlete, but he's a gymnast. He's also got the ACL surgery done 7 months back, and after the rehabilitation he's able to do gymnast at the local level. This was done at the village level. He doesn't have a professional training though. So in the end, I'm grateful to all of you for your kind listening, and also grateful that I've got all the opportunity to work with great people around the world. You can contact me by these links, website, blog, and there is a contact helpline number. So you can contact me by these things. Deeptam, I think my talk is over, and we can take any question and answer.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for such a nice presentation. You have highlighted the real life case scenarios, and I think it is very much help for the audience who have joined today. So we will be taking the Q&A, sir. So the question that we had is that have you faced with recurrent instability and neuropraxia?
I would say I have not seen such patient with the recurrent instability neuropraxia. In an acute traumatic situation, yes, I have seen a neuropraxia of the axillary nerve, and there is a deltoid atony, and eventually it recovers after 3 or 4 weeks. Eventually it recovers.
Okay, sir. So we have the next question from an anonymous attendee. Here the doctor is asking, like, what is the exact mechanism for chronic neuropathic pain-induced anxiety, and how to overcome this?
Chronic
neuropathic pain-induced anxiety.
So
yes,
there is a separate department for that. That is the pain physician. So I think these patients are better to be referred to a pain physician.
Actually, I think the doctor has asked like your opinion on this. Like
my opinion, because I do not see these patients. This is not related to the shoulder injuries.
Yes, sir.
Okay. He might be asking about some reflex sympathetic dystrophy or kind of that thing, but this is not related to the shoulder injuries or knee injuries. So better if something is there, I would refer them to a pain physician.
Right, sir. So we have the next question. Here the doctor is asking, any experience with episacroiliac lipomas and its relation with shoulder pain?
What? Can you say it again?
Any experience with episacroiliac lipomas and its relation with shoulder pain?
No, it cannot be related to, because sacrum and shoulder, they are quite different entity. So it cannot be related.
Okay.
It cannot be related.
So the next question is like, what are the most effective recommendations to treat chronic pain due to degenerative joint conditions?
Yes. So degenerative condition, it can be there in any joint. It can most commonly affected is the knee with osteoarthritis. Can be there in shoulder as well. So these patients initially they should be managed with the lifestyle modification, that is avoid lifting heavy weights if it is a shoulder joint, and with the physiotherapy to strengthen these muscles. So there is not a much of a load on the cartilage, so it can be preserved. So these patients should initially be started with the physical therapy. They can start with the pain modalities, and also they can do some lifestyle modifications.
Right, sir.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. So we have the next question. The question is like, what is your drug of choice in early stages of shoulder surgery?
Early stages of shoulder surgeries after the surgery. He's asking about
Yes,
after the surgery.
yes, yes.
So
After post-operative. Yeah.
yes. So most of these surgeries, they are done arthroscopically. So after an arthroscopic surgery, they are done with 2 or 3 portals only. So I would prescribe them antibiotics for at least 3 days. And then the anti-inflammatory drugs for 5 to 10 days, depending upon the case scenario. And painkiller is SOS only. And use ice compression often. So that will relieve the pain in arthroscopic. If it is an open surgery, then I would require to extend my antibiotics, the anti-inflammatory drugs, for at least 7 days, like a shoulder replacement surgery. That is an open surgery. So for those patients, I would extend my antibiotics, the anti-inflammatory drugs. So these drugs for at least 7 days.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
So we have the next question. Here the doctor is asking, like, your clinical experience on the efficacy of Tram-Para in the treatment of shoulder surgery cases.
Tram-Para.
Tram-Para, like Ultraset, sir.
Ultraset. So for the shoulder injuries patient, I would not prefer tramadol paracetamol. I would prefer the tramadol paracetamol only for a pain of like a rib fracture. So nociceptive pain, that kind of pain, I would prefer an Ultraset kind of thing, Tramapara. For the injury kind of thing, I would prefer a painkiller like atrocoxib paracetamol or aciclovir, the NSAIDs. So they would do better in case of an injury. And I would add this trypsin, bromelain, rutoside combination always with any sort of soft tissue injury, whether it is an injury or even if it is a post-operative period. So to get the better soft tissue healing, I would always add trypsin, chymotrypsin, bromelain, rutoside combination, that is chimeral fort kind of thing. So that I would always use.
Thank you, sir. So we have the next question from Dr. Govind Singh. Here the doctor is asking, like, what medication is better for shoulder injury, opioid analgesic or NSAIDs? How you decide?
So if it is an injury, so I would say I've described that if it is an injury, that NSAID is better option. If it is a chronic pain due to an arthritis, you cannot give these medications for long period. So in that case, Ultraset or the Tramapara is a quite safe option.
Thank you, sir. So we have the next question here. Just one second. Here, the doctor is asking, like, what is the chance of arthrofibrosis in women and how frequent it is?
Arthrofibrosis is the term which we use when there is stiffness and pain after any surgery. So arthrofibrosis is common after knee surgery. The stiffness, what we call as adhesive capsulitis, this is common after knee surgery. Shoulder, it is uncommon because it's a more of a mobile joint. So it is uncommon. Male or female difference, it is not there. There is not much of difference between male and female, but it is quite common in knee joint. But shoulder joint, it is less likely to get arthrofibrosis. Stiffness might be due to lack of physiotherapy by the patient. So after a surgery, if somebody is not doing a proper rehabilitation, there might be a stiffness, but with continuous rehabilitation, it can be overcome. But if we say an arthrofibrosis, it is quite common after knee injury.
Thank you, sir. So we have the next question. Here the question is from anonymous attendee. Here the doctor is asking like how frequently you come across patients with comorbidities and having shoulder injuries in your daily clinical practice, and what is the ideal drug of choice in this set of patients who are coming to you with comorbidities like diabetes or any other cardiac complications?
Okay, so you have a pain around the shoulder and there is a comorbidity. So in those patients, there should be a drug which should be cardiac safe. So etocoxib we cannot give, and it should be a renal safe drug. So NSAIDs we cannot give. It should be a liver safe drug. So again, nimesulide kind of drugs they cannot be given. So in those patients, I would say this morphine congener. So this the tramadol, the tapentadol, the ketorolac. So these analgesic they can be used.
Right. So, and also the first part of the question is like how frequently do you come across these comorbid patients in your daily clinical practice?
Yes, because these shoulder pain patients, they come in two categories. That is the young patient, they are free from comorbidity. The old patient, those are mostly rotator cuff tear patients or less likely a frozen shoulder patient. Those patients often have comorbidity, that is diabetes, hypertension, ischemic heart disease. So these are quite often. So in those patients, I would use the tramadol. Yes, it is quite common.
Right, sir. So we have I think the same kind of question from Dr. Pardeep Agarwal. Like he is also asking the same thing, like what medicine you choose in comorbid conditions like old age, patients with renal or cardio diseases. I think almost the same question.
Yes, same question. Yes.
So coming to the next question, here the question is again from an anonymous attendee. Here the doctor is asking like any experience about laser therapy and musculoskeletal chronic pain treatment.
Being a surgeon, I do not do these conservative things. Laser therapy, I do not have any experience, but my physio would tell better about this.
Right, sir. So we have the next question, like how often do you come across patients with fracture, and what is your drug of choice in early stages of fracture?
Again, painkiller. He's asking about painkiller. There are so many questions about the painkiller. The answer is the same. Answer is the same for all the questions. We see shoulder and knee trauma and quite often. And for the IV analgesic, depending upon the patient's renal, kidney, cardio profile, we can use the analgesics, that is NSAIDs or the tramadol. These things can be used, but we need to see the patient's profile. That this is entirely dependent upon the patient profile.
Right, sir. So you have the next question. This is a question from anonymous attendee, almost kind of question that was asked before. Like, a patient is coming to your clinic and he is having a kind of shoulder surgery, so post-operative case, of course. And then the patient is having renal complications, like his EGFR is very down. So in that cases, what is the ideal drug of choice?
Again, the same drug which I've told so many times, that is tramadol, paracetamol. This is quite safe.
Right, sir.
Yes, we can in few patients, if you are not able to give the tablets, there are so many patches available. The Buvilor patch, this is a patch which bypasses the first pass metabolism. So this is absorbed by the skin. So they are having a less GI and less kidney effects. So and liver effect. So these patches can be used.
Right, sir. So we have the next question from Dr. Govind Saini. Here the doctor is asking like, what are the 3 common shoulder injuries?
Yes, that is a very good question. And the common shoulder injuries is the first is the always fracture. Second is the rotator cuff tear, and third is the dislocation. So these 3 common scenarios we see very often.
Thank you, sir. So we have the next question. Here the doctor is asking like, what is the most painful shoulder surgery?
No, surgery is not going to be painful. It should not be painful. It should be comfortable to the patient. And here comes the role of the pain physician or of the analgesics. So after surgery, arthroscopy surgery, they are very less traumatic to the patient, very less pain. But the surgeries of shoulder or joint, that is for the tumor. So these surgery may be painful because we need to dissect a lot of tissue. So you need to remove the entire tumor. You need to remove the full tumor, whichever is there. So you need to dissect so many soft tissue, so much of the tissue. So it may be painful, and that patient is already in pain due to the tumor, the cancer. So those patients may have a pain post-operatively. Otherwise, the shoulder surgery, they do not have much of pain.
Thank you, sir. So we have the next question. Here the doctor is asking. Here the question is also from an anonymous attendee. Here the doctor is asking like, how long after shoulder surgery does the pain last?
Yes, the pain of the surgery, arthroscopic, I would say maximum 7 to 10 days. But due to continuous immobilization, lack of proper rehabilitation, lack of poor muscle power, muscle strength, the pain may last, I would say, endless. If somebody is not doing proper physiotherapy, or the post-operative pain after an open surgery, it may last for at least 1 month. But if somebody is not doing physiotherapy, that pain due to this stiffness and all, it may last for forever. But he needs to do good physiotherapy. So after that, in open surgery, it may last for at least 1 month.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is like, what are the symptoms of a shoulder injury?
Yes, if I say any injury, first thing is to develop pain, swelling, or if it is a fracture, somebody may develop deformity. If there is a fracture, he may have a loss of transmissal movement. That means the movement of the hand cannot be transferred to the shoulder. So there is a loss of that movement. So these things they get after injury.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is again like, how do I know if I have damaged my rotator cuff?
Yes, that is a very good question. So if somebody is having a rotator cuff tear, so first thing, he will get a pain and weakness of the shoulder. That means he will not be able to lift actively. He will not be able to lift. If it is a supraspinatus tear, there is a loss of initiation of abduction. And if there is a infraspinatus tear, there is loss of external rotation. If it is a subscapular tear, there is a loss of internal rotation. But how you can differentiate with the frozen shoulder is that you cannot do a passive movement in frozen shoulder, but in rotator cuff tear you can do a passive movement. Means if somebody lifts the shoulder, he will be able to do that. So the passive movement is also lost in frozen shoulder, whereas in the rotator cuff tear, the active movement is only lost. The passive movements are, you can do it.
Thank you, sir. So here's the next question again from Dr. Govind Singh. Here the doctor is asking like, what is a meniscus? What is red flags and symptoms to identify?
Can you repeat?
What is a meniscus and what is red flags and symptoms to identify?
Yes, the meniscus is the having a function of the shock absorption inside the knee joint, and there are 2 meniscus, that is medial meniscus and the lateral meniscus for the part of the joint, medial part and the lateral part. And it is the tibiofemoral articulation. in between that there is a meniscus that absorbs the shock of any movement or any impact inside the knee. And if there is a meniscus tear, so there is going to be a pain, swelling around the joint line, because inside the joint there is a meniscus. And if there is a tear, that is known as a bucket handle tear, so that that bucket handle part comes inside the notch and it leads to a locking. And if you do some flexion extension movements, so in that movement you can see that click. There are some certain tests that you can do, McMurray test, joint line test. So these tests you can do to check whether there is a meniscus injury.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
So the next question is like, what are the risks of complications and what is the complication rate? This is the next question, sir.
What is the complication rate of what?
Shoulder surgery.
Shoulder surgery. If arthroscopic surgery, I would say 1 in 1,000. If it is an open surgery, I would say 1 in 100. So arthroscopic surgery, it is less likely to get a complication. And the open surgeries, there might be a complication of like an infection, wound problems. There might be a problem of re-injury around that implant part. So these are complications around the shoulder, which is common in open surgeries.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is, what is the expected length of recovery from shoulder surgery?
Expected length of recovery.
Recovery, yes, sir.
Yes, if I say a rotator cuff tear or a Bankart repair surgery, the arthroscopic surgery, 3 to 4 months. If it is an open surgery, again, it depends. If it is an arthroplasty, I would say 2-3 months he can recover. And if it is a different fracture or something like that, it may be long recovery.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is asked by Dr. Mahesh Gupta. Here the doctor is asking, what can be treatment in case of unknown or chronic shoulder pain, like surgery or physiotherapy? What is your opinion on this?
Can you repeat the question?
What can be the treatment in case of unknown or chronic shoulder pain, like surgery or physiotherapy? What is your opinion on this?
Yes. So there is nothing like an unknown entity. First, you need to diagnose the cause of pain. So you cannot treat if you do not diagnose. First and foremost is to diagnose. And for diagnosis, first you need to listen to the patient. That is the history of that patient. Second is the clinical examination. And third is the investigation. So by these 3 virtues, you need to get a diagnosis done. So you cannot rush to the treatment, straightforward to the surgery, to the physiotherapy or medications. First, you need to establish a diagnosis. That is a must.
Thank you, sir. So the next question is like, what is the difference between arthroscopy and arthroscopic?
No, there is nothing like an orthoscopy. It is always an arthroscopic. So any joint, if you visualize, it is known as an arthroscopy. So that is visualization of an inside of a joint. That is arthroscopy. There is no orthoscopy.
Okay, sir. So the next question is what are the risk of complications of arthroscopic meniscus surgery?
Risk of complications of that. So in meniscectomy, I would say it is less likely to get a complication. That is a long-term complication is the loss of the hoop stresses, and it may lead to an eventual arthritis after so many years. But in case of meniscus repair, there might be a possibility of a failure of a repair, and there might be a failure of that healing as well, and there might be a re-tear, and later on you may require a re-repair or you may require a meniscectomy.
Thank you, sir. So we have a few more questions. We are about to end. There are 3-4 more questions which are there. The other question is again from an anonymous attendee. The doctor is asking, how long after shoulder surgery does the pain last?
The same question. I've already answered this question.
Sorry,
Yes,
I may
yes,
have read
yes.
the question. Yes. So the next question is, can you walk right after arthroscopic knee surgery?
Not always. Yes, you may be able to walk, but the weight bearing, whether you will be able to weight bear or not, it depends upon the surgeries. Uh, if it is a straightforward ACL surgery, you may be able to weight bear day one. But if it is an associated cartilage injury, meniscus injury, or some repair surgery is added to that, so in that case, the weight bearing may be delayed. But most of these patients will be able to walk with the help of a walker and non-weight bearing.
Thank you, sir.
Yes.
So we have the next question. Here the doctor is asking, like, what factors from the radiology report are used in decision making for arthroscopy?
So in any patient treatment, there are three things which you need to consider. One is the whether there is a complaint to the patient. Second, is there a relevant clinical finding? And third thing is the report. So you need not to have believe the report only. The patient might be entirely asymptomatic, which has been shown in the report in an MRI image. So you need to find the history, the examination, and the MRI findings. If these three things relate, then you can establish a diagnosis, and after the diagnosis, you can make a protocol of having this patient being treated by a conservative therapy or a surgery.
Thank you, sir. So we have the last two questions. Here the last question is, the second last question is, like, what are the symptoms of failed shoulder surgery?
So if anything fails, that that patient is having to his or her symptoms again. If it was done for a rotator cuff repair and that has failed, that leads to a pain and weakness. So if it is a failed dislocation surgery, it leads to a repeated dislocations.
Right, sir. So I think the last question is almost of the same kind. Like, here the question is again from anonymous attendee. The doctor is asking, like, how do you know if you have a failed rotator cuff surgery?
Yes, again, if the patient has failed the rotator cuff surgery, then he's going to get the loss of shoulder power, that he will not be able to lift the shoulder again, and he's going to have the pain, the night pain. These are a few things.
Thank you, sir. So we have one last question. Does a degenerative meniscus lesion always require an arthroscopic look and surgery?
Yes, that is a very good question. I would say this is the best question which I had, but this I had at the last. So degenerative meniscus tear, we often see on MRI, but most of the time, I would say 90% time, they are asymptomatic. If you get an MRI of a normal person at the age of 25 without any symptoms, 25% of these patients are going to have a degenerative meniscus or something else, that there is going to be a finding. If you do an MRI of a normal person after the age of 45, 50% chances are there he is going to get a finding like a degenerative meniscus tear. So degenerative things you need not to touch if it is not symptomatic. If there is a relevant symptom to that, if there is a degenerative tear of posterior horn of medial meniscus, that is a common finding in almost all the MRIs after 50. But if that is symptomatic, if it is relevant to your clinical finding, then you need to intervene. Otherwise, need not to touch them.
Thank you, sir. So we don't have any more questions. I would like to thank you, sir, for answering all the questions in a very lucid way. Sir, like, any last suggestion or comment that you want to share with all the audience who are present in today's online symposium?
First of all, I would like to thank Jensen, and I would like to thank you, and thank you all the audience for the active participation, because we had so many questions for the talk, because it is very common that people are not listening to you. So there are so many questions that clearly says that they were listening and they were actively participating. So thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Dr. Rajat Jangir, for such a nice presentation. It was indeed a pleasure to have you today, and it was indeed a very nice presentation. And I hope that all the HCPs who have attended today's symposium, they have got various new insights. All the queries that the doctors have, they have got cleared. You have the helpline number, you have the website. You can directly contact with Dr. Rajat Jangir if required in future. At the same time, I would like to thank Dr. once again, Dr. Rajat Jangir, for such a nice presentation that he has taken us through in today's talk. And at the end, I would also like to thank my colleagues from Johnson & Johnson who have made their time and invited the doctors from all over North India, and more importantly, all the audience, all the HCPs who have made their valuable time to be a part of today's online symposium on case-based webinar on recent shoulder surgery. So I think thanks a lot, sir. Thanks a lot to all the HCPs for your valuable presence in today's symposium. And thanks to all my Johnson & Johnson colleagues. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.